Millions of speeches, speeches for me. Millions of speeches, speeches for free. Yeah. If you know that reference, then you're cool. I mean, it's not like I'm totally giving you a massive hint. Um, but no, yeah. Um, Subscribe and you might just get some peaches that were put in a can by a man in a factory downtown. Alright, what are we talking about today? Speeches. Speeches, it's an interesting topic. A lot of people have either never given them or they don't do them often or whatever, and they kind of get a little nervous when they get up there and talk. And I've realized just over time you end up having to do them more and more and more and more. And something I've kind of realized is the less you write down, the better. At least for me. So, like, I don't know, if you're writing like a 15-page speech and you're trying to read directly off that page, it's just going to be terrible. Like, what you really want are like those short and sweet little notes. And I don't know, I wanted to talk about some speeches today because I have nothing better to do. So yeah, speeches. It's one of those things where like you end up doing them so much later in life, whether or not it's like a presentation, which is basically a speech, or, you're going up in front of your entire high school and you have to give a speech, or you're at your, I don't know, someone's wedding, things like that. And, considering I'm talking about speeches, I figured I would just talk about two experiences I had. Some a little brief, some a little long. The first one I wanted to talk about was, oh boy. So back in the day, I just so happened to be the best man at my father's wedding, and had to give a speech. Of course, yeah, had to give a speech because that's just what you do. So there were 4 people giving a speech that day, and I was the last one. My notes for that speech might have been, I don't know, 3, possibly 4 lines. And I had to speak for like 3, possibly 4 minutes. So, I wasn't necessarily prepared. But I think it was the goal of any speech, you have to have something going into it, right? You have to have some drive, like, what do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish with this? Do I want to be funny? Do I want to be informative? Do I want to just be formal and kind? It's a wedding. I decided being funny was a better bet, and let's just say what I said at the end probably made some older people make a face like this. I'll say this, it was my father's wedding, and I knew this wouldn't necessarily ruin his day, but I definitely did think it would be shocking. So, I went through the speech like normal, just, oh, it's great that we're, that you're remarrying after all this time, you finally met someone, things like that, you're having a great time. Oh, it's great, I love it. And then I just so happened to say at the end, 3rd time's the charm. Now you might wonder, 3rd time's the charm, what does that mean? Maybe you don't. Maybe you're naive. Well, my dad might have just been on their 3rd wedding because he was divorced twice. So yeah, saying that one in the middle of a wedding certainly gave people a little bit of a shock. It's one of those things where, like, the goal of a speech, you have to have some drive, right? Some build-up. And I think if you're going to do a short speech, you want that, like, whammy. And that was my whammy. But it's like, I don't know. It's just the whole speech thing, like, it really is kind of getting your gist ready before you deliver that speech. Like, what is the basic idea that you want to present? You don't have to go in there with like a full-on plan. You just have to have like the idea. Another time that comes to mind, I had to do a salutatorian speech. If you don't know what a salutatorian is, well, it's the second place. So first loser when compared to valedictorian. And it just so happens I had to make the speech, record it, and then leave it online for all to see. Now, this is more of a cautionary tale compared to the last one. The last one was me just kind of like, oh, I write a few notes, give a speech, and, make people laugh a little bit. This one I wrote like a 2-page document. Did this speech as stiff as a board because I'm, reading off of a sheet the entire time. And it lives in infamy online. God forbid anyone ever finds that. But it's kind of a cautionary tale, saying stiff things like, oh, our year was great, I loved everything, while grandma's looking on just like, oh boy, you did a great speech that day. And you're just doing literally nothing. You're saying like, oh wow, the school year was incredible even though I never interacted with any of you. Just basically doing nothing. Reading off the script that you think, on paper sounds pretty good, but in reality, when you talk like that, when you talk like how you write, you end up just sounding stiff, terrible, like you have no soul. It's just one of those things. Like giving a speech where you're, not necessarily coming off the cuff, like you're not talking off the cuff. It ends up being so stiff and just lifeless. And that's probably the worst speech you can possibly give. I mean, if you look back in like history, a lot of the speeches, they'll write, multiple notes down and interpreting like what the crowd is going to be like. But if you listen to a speech given by someone, normally their notes are not necessarily the same as their vocals. Like they'll have those notes and they'll follow them to a degree, but they're never like the thing that they focus on, and I think that's kind of like that string that rings true, right? I don't know, like I was just thinking like, I want a topic to talk about, and the topic today, being speeches and everything, it's just kind of, it's one of those things where I feel like I just want to say, when you do have to give a speech, over preparing sometimes hinders you more than, just going in and winging it. It really does sometimes. Like, I don't know, for example, in college, you're going to a college class, you have to prepare some sort of presentation, right? If you just write the basic idea in that presentation and then go off the cuff when you give the actual speech, you'll sound a lot more genuine a lot of the time. When you see these people that write down like all these notes, I've noticed something. The people that do that are normally doing that because they're afraid, right, of going off the cuff. They're afraid that they're going to, not know what to say or something like that. The problem with that is, because of that fear, they end up being stiff, they end up being rigid, and to be honest, they're not really giving an effective speech. They're giving information, they're giving, basically an essay, like it might be a good in an essay form, but they're not really giving an effective speech. If you don't have at least some of your own voice in there, it's going to be a problem, because I think the written word is not always the same as the voice. When I write, I'm like extremely formal. And I know that. Like, when I say, like, okay, I spell O-K-A-Y. Like, the full-on, like, old-fashioned spelling of okay and things like that. I don't use, like, contractions very often. Like, I don't know, won't or something. I'll just say will not. But, like, when I talk, I know that I talk differently. There are times when I use kind of like hillbilly sort of like, well, what's going on? Things like that. And that's because your vocals are different than your written. And I think a lot of people kind of tend to think that just because they write a speech, they're going to say it just the way they're thinking they will. But I think in reality, there is an element of like, you need to be able to just talk. You need to work on just talking off the cuff. You have to work on that information. You need to get those main points, but how you deliver it is more about your actual ability to speak, not your ability to write. And I feel like a lot of people don't really realize that sometimes. and this is different. Like when you're acting or something, written word is it's different, right? Like when you're acting, you're planning out to act this out, right? Whereas a speech is something that I think is a lot more general, off the cuff. It's meant to, make people feel like they're in a genuine conversation. When I see people acting, it's like you can tell they're acting at the end of the day, right? Like it's an act. When I see someone like doing a speech, it's meant to be that person, the personality. And I don't know. I think it's just something a lot of people overlook, where like your actual speaking ability is the thing being tested. Your writing ability, of course, could be useful and probably will be, but a lot of people focus on that writing. I see a lot of people that do poor speeches. They end up writing like I said, like the 2-page papers when they, do the online speech or something, for example. And I think that leads to a lot of problems. And I don't know. I just wanted to talk about that today because I just happened to hear a speech recently from another young person, and it just made me think, like, it's not something that you'll get better at if you write it down all the time, because that is kind of like it defeats the purpose of a speech. It's the vocal, not the written. And I'm sure there are some people that write the way they speak, but most people don't. I'm going to be perfectly honest. When you go to write a speech, you do not write the way you talk most of the time. I think a lot of people think they do, but most people don't. It's just your natural speaking voice is very different than your natural writing, because when you're writing, I think there's always this like level of overthinking, whereas when you're speaking, it can be off the cuff. And I think speeches are kind of a test of, can you do that off the cuff level of speaking. Now, hey, listen, if you have a different way of doing speeches that works for you, that's cool. This is just for me, and this is just my beliefs on speeches. I'm not saying it's true, I'm not saying it's false, I'm just saying this is what I think. If you think something differently, that's cool. Maybe let me know what you think about speeches below. But yeah, I think that's about it. Like, comment, subscribe. I don't know. Leave something else for me to make a video on down below. And yeah, I'll see you.